Welcome to Shooting Straight with AMF.com. I'm Frank Miniature, the editor-in-chief. The editor is America's First Freedom. Now, today, we have Brandon Maddox from Silencer Central, because there's just nobody better to explain the ATF trouble people have to go through in order to buy a suppressor these days. So let's just start right from the beginning, because how does a pharmaceutical guy end up building Silencer Central to the company that it is today?
That's a good question. I often say my dad's a pharmacist, so a natural transition for me to go into pharmacy and, you know, like I keep my license up for 3 states to practice pharmacy, but I've honestly, I've never really practiced pharmacy, but, um, you know, I started hunting, prairie dogs out South Dakota, and that's kind of where I realized the potential benefits of a suppressor. This was like in the mid early 2000s. You really couldn't find anything that talked about it or even gave you any insights. But, the first one I purchased, the process was horrible, but I absolutely loved the end use to be able to shoot prairie dogs with a suppressor. So it kind of get me hooked on the whole suppressor thing. But, the first one I bought wasn't the ideal fit for my application. So I bought another one and it wasn't either. So it wasn't until the third one. And that's when I was like, I should really get my own license. And, license to sell suppressors is expensive. So I think to sort of help justify the expense, that's when I started saying, well, I better just sell a few just to keep the license up so the wife's not yelling at me. And, I guess the rest is history, right?
Well, you started another company before Silencer Central, didn't you?
At the same time, so I started FFL 123, help people get their federal firearms license. I've helped, I run into people here at the show, SHOT Show. Everyone has gotten their federal firearms license. I helped them get it. Pretty much the same time I started them, because it's interesting if I look back at the financials, one would be doing really well and I would use the money to help kind of get the other one growing. And then one would slow and I would use the money to try to back and forth. It wasn't really until like 2009, 2010, until the whole suppressor market started picking up more. And I started branching out, getting more licenses. But, FFL 123, I always say it would have been difficult for me to go into all 42 states where silencers are legal, because part of our business model is we have a physical location in FFL in every state where the silencers are legal. I don't know if I would have taken off that big of a, apple to bite into if I had not been involved in helping people across the country get their federal firearms license. So it was a good training ground for, future expansion later.
Well, there wasn't 42 states a while back when you first started.
No, you're right. No, totally. When I first started, most notably, South Dakota, where I live, is pretty much at the corner of Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa. And at the Sioux Falls Gun Show, probably half of your traffic would come from other states other than South Dakota. And when I first started doing this, they were not legal in Minnesota or Iowa, suppressors. So it did made it hard. I mean, even now when you're at larger events, you have to make sure you're not talking to guys that are, from California or somewhere where they can't buy them. Or even the Great Outdoor Show, the NRA Great Outdoor Show out there too. We have to be careful, some of those states, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Rhode Island, we can't sell to. But yeah, no, I think that's like a positive example. So a lot of times my employees, when they're interviewing, they're like, oh, what happens if you get overly regulated? And they try to take you out. And I'm like, if anything with suppressors, I have found that the laws have, loosened up, if you will, meaning that more states allow hunting than they did when I first started. And also they're lawful in more states than they were when I first started as well.
This is partly because of NRA lobbying.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm assuming then you've worked with the NRA.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Anytime I've worked at a state level, honestly, the key is to get the NRA to buy into whatever the issue is, because they're going to have the relationship with the elected officials. And the NRA has been instrumental in a lot of even concealed carry stuff I've tried to pass at a state level to make sure that, the concealed carry would be NICS exempt. So there's no background check for that customer. Just makes the process easier. South Dakota, big area to travel. So someone might travel to a gun show to pick up their suppressor. And if it's delayed, the chance of then connecting back with them 3 or 4 days later just doesn't happen. So the NICS exempt was a big thing. But honestly, that helped me sort of make really strong connections. Fortunately for me, the NRA people I've worked with have all continued to move up in the organization, and to have an advocate at higher levels in the organization has been instrumental as well.
Most people don't know, too, this is almost 100 years now since the National Firearms Act of 1934.
Yes.
So the government has been regulating suppressors.
Absolutely.
And that sounds essentially what you're helping people navigate. How do you help people through that process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I first started, I got to the point when I got my second. So our first location was South Dakota. Second location was North Dakota. And I got to the point where it's like, well, am I doing everything I should be doing correctly with 2 locations? I called up to ATF in St. Paul, and what I found out really quickly was that they weren't as familiar in the local field office with all the rules because they were illegal in Minnesota. Um, I think that sort of my first step when I started was I've got to really, really learn, the whole processes, the rules, the laws, so that it's hard to scale a business if you don't know what you can and cannot do. And then also, it's not fair to your employees or your customers if you don't know what you're doing correctly. So, the first step really for me was to double down. I did hire someone from NSSF where they sent someone out, Wally Nelson. He had been up at the ATF for a lot of years, had recently retired. So he had a lot of great connections to came and kind of audited me, self-audited, and it was able to help me understand the rules. And oddly enough, he helped me understand the whole concept of variances. A lot of our business model works on variances. To your point with, the Gun Control Act of 68 and the NFA of 34, a lot of this is open to their interpretation, unfortunately. And, they kind of have a monopoly on enforcement. So it's good to sit down with them and say, hey, this is what the, statutes say. Here's what makes sense from sort of a modern era with digital. How do we figure this out? And I honestly found in most cases, if you could show ATF it doesn't contradict the laws the way they're written, it makes it easier for them to inspect you, and there's no, negative impact to public safety. Typically, they'll go along with it. So we were able to, navigate a lot of variances to help us through the process better. But specifically to your question on how we help people, I mean, really, we've created a system at Silencer Central that makes the transfer of the silencer from us, the dealer, to the end user so simple that once it's approved, we mail it to the customer's front door. And a lot of people feel like, wow, how's that even possible? But honestly, it was just reading the statutes, sitting down with the NFA branch, ATF, and asking them to allow us to do things certain ways. Sometimes those were a couple months to wait. I've had some take years for them to respond, but we've really sort of taken the process at each level and figured out how can we simplify it, make it easier for the customer so that we then can mail it to their front door.
Does it vary in these 42 states as maybe local regulations, state regulations as well?
Yeah, no, for sure. So when we first started moving to new states, obviously we hired counsel in each of those states to make sure that anything we were doing in that state before we applied for the license wouldn't put the customer or us in violation of, state law. And in some states, we actually had to sit down and negotiate with the AG's office and walk them through exactly what we were doing, just because ATF was giving us a little pushback on, hey, we're not sure this is going to work here. So we sat down with the AG offices in several states, walked them through our business model, walked them through all the check steps in the process, but the statutes require that before we submit a Form 4 for a silencer transfer, we have to let local law enforcement know that we're doing that transfer. So that's on the front end. And our process on the back end is the same way. And that we have to send it certified mail and have proof that it was delivered to them. So there's a lot of check steps in there that once we sort of walked the local states of how we do that, it did help. But to your point, there are some different states that we have to navigate differently even now from a process standpoint.
So a customer calls you from Florida, from Georgia, from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
You'll know.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
You can walk them through.
Yeah, totally. In the NFA process, the paperwork, we do 100% of that in Sioux Falls in South Dakota. So big facility there, do all the paperwork on the front end there. But then when it comes back approved, the back end has to be done at the location where that customer is a resident. So our Florida customer, their paperwork's being processed there, and the silencer is actually being shipped from the Florida location to that customer in Florida.
Go back to the ATF. Are you seeing it improve there now that it's gone? It's supposed to be digital.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's working, but it's supposed to be digital. Are you seeing the time improving? What's it, about a year before people are not getting suppressors, or less?
Yeah, good question. So, they did get a little bit behind the ATF during the pandemic, and I think it was just probably their work schedules. They were working from home, and they would only come to the office maybe once a month and submit, all the mailed approvals would come to us. So we did see them get behind during the pandemic just because of the demand. So, they released the statistics here for last year as far as the number of forms they got in. It was only 10% higher for 2022 from what it was in 2021. But, I don't know that I had anticipated that they would sit on the electronic forms that had been submitted and they focused solely on the paper forms. So they flushed all the paper forms out of the system now, and they're focused solely on the digital. But their feedback is that it takes about 25% of the amount of time to process a digital as it did the paper. And also, they've eliminated part of the process. Before, if we submitted a form to them that needed a minor change, let's say, for instance, they were a junior, maybe the customer didn't put they were junior, something minor, ATF would send it back to us. We would update it and then mail it back to them, and then they would approve it. So it's a quick, fix. They call it error letter process. Now they've done away with that. So if you submit it digitally and it's wrong, they just reject it.
You got to start the process again.
Totally. Which, when they first launched, it didn't sound bad because we thought it was going to be quick, Well, if they're going through in 60, 90 days, that would be great. And if you have to start over, that's not great, but at least it's not a whole year. So I think that sped up their process too, that now they used to have an entire, staff that did the error letters and exceptions. And, all of ours are pretty much data entered digital and submitted digital. Like our entire process is digital. So I'm not saying we don't make errors, but it's like less than 0.5%. So it's not a big issue for us, but for ATF, just for their internal structure, it cuts off a lot of time for them to be able to prove more. So to your question, my staff ask at the town hall with the NFA branch, when we show up here next year, what are you going to say is the average wait time? Like, what's your goal? Where do you think you'll get at? The new ATF director said they've hired 20 more examiners, 17 of which will actually be doing examining. 3 were going to be leadership to manage those folks. But Amy Steely, chief of NFA branch, said 120 days. So if she could get things done in 120 days, that will really help our business. People are apt to buy another one. They're apt to tell their friends quicker. It just speeds the whole thing up. So I do think digital is going to improve things. I think it's taking longer to get to that point than I thought it would. But
4 months is fast.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, totally, yeah. So I mean, we've been looking at, gosh, is there a way to create some legislation where we say, hey, if I apply for an FFL license, I have 60 days for them to respond by statute. If you buy a handgun, same thing. You got 3 days they have to respond by the FBI. If I change my address for my FFL license, the ATF has 30 days to respond. So it's kind of a shall issue type scenario. So we would like to get something like that in place for NFA for, getting the silencers approved. Tell them they have 30 days to approve them. We got to do a background check and make a decision and move it forward. No reason why it should take that long. I mean, now we're uploading the digital fingerprints. They're using that upload and sending it to FBI. They're batch sending them where they're sending, 10, 15, 20,000 at a time to have background checks done. So there's a lot more efficiencies on the digital that they should be utilizing and, approving them quicker.
You have the NICS process.
Yeah.
Why can't it be that fast?
Totally. Yeah, it should be. What hurts them is 35% of all NICS checks end up in a delay and they have to have a manual review. And the problem is there's no statutory requirement for timing on how long they have to do that manual review. So the FBI puts it on the back burner. So their main focus is the retail firearms dealer. And then since it's on the back burner, sometimes it adds 2 to 3 months to the process time.
Wow. Yeah, I've been to the ATFs. They've got a center out in West Virginia where where old forms go there from gun shops that are going out of business. And their trailers out back full of form. The place inside is a mess.
Yeah.
Like they were boasting that it was a mess.
Oh, yeah.
For more money, but it didn't give me a lot of faith in the bureaucracy.
No, gosh. I was out there one time right after one of the Gander Mountains had closed down and they were showing us the 18-wheelers full of 4473s they're having to scan in. You're right. It's a mess. That's a huge building, that old IRS building. But yeah, NFA branch is there. I've toured it. They used to allow us to come annually. They have to prepare for us and put everything away because it's tax data. But, it's good to kind of meet the examiners. I feel like that they're doing our paperwork every day. We're working with them every day. But to actually meet them face to face was interesting to me.
No, I've met a lot of ATF agents doing various stories, and I've always been impressed with the agency level people. Right?
True, definitely.
There's a lot of good people there.
Yeah.
First time I saw suppressors 20 years ago was actually in Finland, and they were calling them sound moderators.
There we go.
And I thought, cool.
Yeah.
We don't have those here. They were just beginning really at the time.
Yeah.
Here now, I'm seeing them a lot more. Do you feel hopeful that it's going to continue to grow? We're 42 states now. It's getting faster. It's digital. This is your business model.
You would think so, right? Because about 2010 is when it started taking off. According to ATF, through January 10th, they've got about 3.2 million of them in the registry that are either waiting to be transferred or have been made and available for transfer. If you walk around on the SHOT Show floor, everyone's launching different suppressors. I would say like our growth compared to the number of applications that came in last year, we're like 3 to 4 times the growth of the overall industry. So I feel like there is my insight for, the whole business model for me. I worked gun shows, so I talked face to face to the end user, and the feedback I got from customers, and I feel like is the key to our business is people have a lot of questions about the process. How do I get it? How long do I wait? What do I have to fill out? Do I have to talk to my sheriff? How do I put it on my gun? Who else can use it? What happens if I die? Can they come into my house? There's all these questions people have. And to me, if you ask anyone that's in the industry that's familiar with suppressors and you ask them why they don't have one, they say the process. So our entire business model is built on how do we make the process simple? And once the customer's convinced we've made that process simple, then they're calling us saying, hey, let's get started. And they don't necessarily say, I want, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, whatever. They're saying, hey, these guys have figured out the process. That was the obstacle in my mind. How do we get started? What's next? So for me, I do think it's going to continue to grow because people are attracted to that, making the process easier. Anyone that has an awareness of a suppressor who shoots, they're going to be attracted by the idea of mitigating, the sound. So they potentially don't have to wear earplugs, and then also the recoil. So those are two big positives. Then the question is, why hasn't everyone done it? It's the process. Someone's made the process easier. How do I learn more? It's funny. When I first started doing this, 2005 is when I started, but 2009 is when I really started working a lot of gun shows and talking to people. Everyone thought they were illegal. So it's come a long way from everyone's like, wow, I can't believe you're here. These aren't legal. And to now people know they're legal, but then they're sort of questioning the process part. No, I think it's going to continue to grow. I think that the weakness right now is the 3.5 million that are in the marketplace. There's 1 million people that own those because one person that buys it, they want two more. And it's funny because I spent, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry after pharmacy school, and that was my day job. And when I first started, I worked the gun shows, and my wife would be like, when I would come home, she's like, do you ever feel guilty? Like sort of pushing people and being very aggressive to get people to buy them at shows. And I'm like, no, because of all the years I've done this, I've never met someone that got a suppressor who didn't say, I wish I'd done this 15 years sooner. And then they end up buying more. So like I said, those 3.2 million that are out there, there's like 1 million that own it. Because once they bought one, they want another one and then another one. And it just keeps going.
Makes your guns more polite.
Oh yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah. And then the recoil, and it's just, yeah, once you get used to shooting it, you're totally hooked. That's why I've used that as a way of, hey, how can we get more people into it? How do we get more people to try them? I was talking earlier, one thing that we've really pushed is like with the NRA local chapters, we give away a free suppressor to each. Actually, I think we give more than one, but we give a lot of suppressors away free to the local chapters. And just having that conversation at that local meeting is meaningful to us because then more people are aware of the suppressor. They're aware of Silencer Central. And it's been a huge benefit to the organization. So we feel like we're giving back and we're also getting the word out there. So to us, it's really a win-win, but it's been very helpful because we started this with the National Wild Turkey and DSC and SCI and some of the other, RMEF. And once it has really started to get out there more, I think that more people are becoming accepting of it. Even in the last 5 years, some of these conservation groups, when we first approached them and offered the suppressors, you could tell they were like, our board's a little older. They're the ones that make the decisions. You got to convince them this is a good idea. And it took time. It was sort of that idea of, crawl, walk, run.
Put mufflers on our cars.
You totally, 100%.
Is Hollywood to blame, do you think, still for that perception?
More so for the politicians, because the politicians are typically anti-suppressors, silencers. It just sounds bad. And they think they're completely silent. It's just like, honestly, it's just like most firearms issues. People are not well educated. They think they understand it based on stuff they've, heard from the left. And then that becomes their reality. But that's the beautiful thing about more people getting suppressors, because more people get them and then they can educate and they can talk to their elected officials. And I see a lot of positive things in the future for the whole suppressor market.
You're a major influencer. I can see this welling up and changing.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. I think that, some of the best advice I got was like really understand the market from a compliance standpoint. So that's kind of been my mantra for the last, 17 years I've been doing this. I'm always on the front row at any presentation that ATF gives about compliance, just understanding it. And I think, again, when people want to understand the process, they ask about the compliance. And to be able to say, hey, I've spent the last 17 years studying, focusing, and really becoming a student to learn more, they can sense that. They know that. It's very popular, like on podcasts, and people listen and go, wow, guy knows a lot of stuff just because he's done it for a long time. So it creates, people you're trying to partner with to be able to speak at that level, gives them confidence that you'd be a good partner to work with just to do other type of, educational events and things like that.
That's why we asked you in here to talk about
No,
this.
I
You're the
appreciate the
man.
opportunity. No, absolutely.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely.